welcome to the Deep Dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be tackling international finance,
Oh,
which I know can sound a little bit daunting,
it can.
but we're going to try to make it fun
Yeah,
for everyone, even if you're completely new to the topic.
absolutely.
And it really is sort of like learning a new language.
Yeah,
We're going to start with like the ABCs, the very basics.
building blocks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It opens up a whole new way of looking at the world when you start to understand these concepts.
Exactly. So our guide today is this wonderful publication from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund,
Right.
called the Balance of Payments and International Investment Position Manual,
Catchy title.
or BPM-6 for
Went
short.
to BPM-6. There we go.
So this is really the rule book for how countries keep track of all their money coming in and going out.
It's the system that the whole world uses to track all these financial interactions.
It's the global accounting system.
Yeah.
So BPM-6 is the roadmap. And let's start with one of the key concepts, which is called the balance of payments,
BOP.
or BOP for short.
Exactly.
So think of this as like a country's financial diary,
Right.
like a giant checkbook for a country
Yeah.
recording every transaction it has with the rest of the world
Keeping track of all that money coming in and going out.
over a specific period.
It's based on a really simple but important principle, the double entry bookkeeping system,
So every transaction has two sides, like a debit and a credit.
just like your own checkbook.
Yeah, so let's say, for example, you buy a rug from Morocco, a beautiful hand-woven rug.
Nice.
Now money's flowing out of your account, so to speak, to pay for that rug.
Right.
So that would be recorded as a debit in your country's balance of payments,
A debit on your side,
and a
You-
credit in Morocco's.
a credit on their side because they're receiving the funds.
So it's a balanced system.
Exactly. A beautiful harmony of debits and credits.
So now within this giant balance of payments checkbook,
Uh-huh.
there are three main accounts.
The big,
Yeah.
the current account, the capital account, and the financial account.
Okay, so the current account is all about the flow of goods and services.
It's the day-to-day business of international trade.
Okay, so that rug that we bought from Morocco, that would fall under the current account.
Absolutely.
And then tourism, if you travel to another country.
tourism, transportation,
Transportation,
all that falls under current account.
even income earned from investment abroad.
Yes, that's right.
So if a company in your country provides consulting services, let's say, to a company in another country,
Mm-hmm.
that would be under the current account.
That would be part of the services component of the current account.
So it's really tracking the exchange of goods and services and income across borders.
Yes, it's the heartbeat of economic activity between countries.
Okay, so now what about the capital account?
All right, the capital account, this one's a little bit more specialized.
Okay,
It covers things like capital transfers.
like what?
Think about things like debt forgiveness or inheritances received from abroad,
Okay.
and also transactions in non-produced, non-financial assets.
What does that even mean?
Well, think of things like patents or trademarks, copyrights.
Oh,
It's
So, for example, if a company sells a patent for, like, a new technology to a company in another country,
Mm-hmm.
that would fall into the capital account.
That's right. That would be a transaction recorded in the capital account.
Okay, and finally, we have the financial account.
The financial account. Yeah, this one's a big one.
It sounds complex.
This one is all about investments and other financial flows between countries.
So if, for example, a company builds a factory in another country,
Uh-huh.
that would be foreign direct investment.
Exactly. And that would fall under the financial account.
Yeah, and then also portfolio investment, which includes things like stocks and bonds.
Right. Buying and selling stocks and bonds issued by foreign companies or governments.
And then also changes in a country's reserve assets.
Yes. Those are the assets held by central banks. Things like gold foreign currencies.
So it's really tracking the movement of capital for investment purposes.
Yeah, it's about how money is flowing around the world to finance different activities.
Okay, so we've got the current account, the capital account, the financial account.
3 pillars of the balance of payments.
Each tells a different part of the story
Right.
of countries' financial interactions with the rest of the world.
It's a fascinating puzzle.
Yeah.
And when you put it all together, it really tells you a lot about what's going on in the global economy.
And how all these countries are interacting
Exactly.
financially.
Yeah, a complex web of transactions.
All right, so we've covered the balance of payments, or BOP, our global checkbook.
Right.
Now let's move on to another key concept, which is called the International Investment Position, or IIP.
Okay.
So if the BOP is like a country's checkbook,
Mm-hmm.
tracking the flow of transactions over time,
Mm-hmm.
The IIP is like its balance sheet,
It is.
providing a snapshot of a country's financial assets and liabilities in relation to the rest of the world.
At a specific point in time.
So it's like taking inventory of what a country owns abroad
Yes.
and what it owes to foreigners.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so the BOP shows us the flow of transactions. The IIP gives us a snapshot.
A snapshot in time.
Yeah.
Like a photograph.
Of a country's overall financial position.
Right.
Now, how does our trusty guide, DPM-6,
Yes.
help us make sense of all this information?
Well, BPM-6 is kind of like the instruction manual
Okay.
for compiling these statistics.
Okay.
It lays out the definitions, the guidelines, the principles to ensure that countries are all speaking the same language.
So it's about creating a level playing field and making sure everybody's following the same rules.
Exactly. It's about having that consistency and comparability
Okay.
across different countries.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier the idea of the IIP being like a country's balance sheet.
Right.
Can you break that down for us a little bit more?
Yeah.
Like what kind of assets and liabilities are we talking about here?
So when we talk about assets in the IIP, we're talking about things like foreign direct investment,
Okay.
or FDI for short,
FBI.
which represents a controlling ownership in a company in another country.
Okay.
So, for example, when a company builds a factory in another country
Mhm.
or acquires a controlling stake in a foreign business.
So it's about having significant influence over the operations of a company in another country.
Yeah, it's about more than just financial investment. It's about having a real presence and control.
Okay.
Then you have portfolio investment, which
Uh-huh.
includes things like owning stocks and bonds issued by foreign companies or governments.
So this is more about spreading your investments across different assets.
Yeah, and seeking financial returns rather than necessarily gaining control over a foreign entity.
Okay, so FDI is about control and influence. Portfolio investment is more about diversifying your portfolio and seeking financial returns.
That's a good way to summarize it.
Okay, and then you also mentioned reserve assets.
Right, reserve assets.
Which are held by central banks.
Yes, these are typically held by central banks to manage exchange rates,
Okay.
intervene in currency markets, and kind of ensure financial stability.
So it's like a country's financial safety net.
In a way, yes, they provide a buffer against external shocks and allow central banks to influence the value of their currency.
Okay, so that was the asset side.
Right.
What about the liabilities?
So liabilities represent a country's obligations to the rest of the world.
Okay.
This includes things like debt securities issued by the government or corporations, loans from foreign banks, and foreign direct investment in the country.
Okay, so it's basically the flip side of the assets.
Exactly.
What foreigners own in our country.
Yes. And by comparing the assets and liabilities, we can get a sense of a country's net international investment position.
Okay.
Is it a net creditor to the rest of the world, meaning it owns more foreign assets than it owes to foreigners? Or is it a net debtor, meaning it owes more to foreigners than it owns in foreign assets?
So the IIP is kind of like a scorecard, showing us a country's overall financial position.
Yeah, a snapshot of its financial health in relation to the rest of the world.
Now, all this might seem pretty abstract, but why should the average person care
That's a great question.
about the balance of payments or the international investment position?
Yeah. How does it impact our everyday lives?
Yeah, it's easy to think of this as something that only affects big corporations or governments.
Right. It can seem very distant.
But it actually affects us in a lot of ways.
It really does. It touches our lives in many ways.
Right, so for example, the exchange rate.
Ah, the exchange rate, yes.
When the value of your country's currency changes,
Relative to other currencies.
it can affect the prices of imported goods,
It does.
like that rug from Morocco.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If your currency strengthens, imports become cheaper. If it weakens, they become more expensive.
So understanding the balance of payments,
Wow.
which tracks all those imports and exports,
Yes.
can help us understand how those exchange rate fluctuations might impact our wallets.
Exactly. It can help you make sense of why things are suddenly costing more or less.
Yeah, and it's not just about consumer goods either.
No, this goes much further than that.
It can also affect businesses.
Businesses that rely on imported materials or export their products, they're very sensitive to these changes as well.
So it's all interconnected.
Yeah, the global economy is a complex web.
Understanding these concepts can help us make better decisions
More informed decisions.
as consumers and participants in the global economy.
Absolutely.
And we can't forget about foreign investment.
Right.
When foreign companies invest in your country.
It can bring a lot of benefits.
Yeah.
Create jobs, boost economic growth, bring new technologies and expertise.
So understanding the international investment position can help us kind of assess the impact of all that foreign investment on our economy and job market.
Yeah, it helps you see the bigger picture of how capital flows across borders.
Okay, I'm really starting to see how all these concepts, they might seem complex at first,
Yeah.
but they actually have real-world implications
Very real implications.
for our lives and the world around us.
It all comes back to how interconnected we are in this globalized world.
Yeah.
And that's why BPM-6 is such a valuable tool.
Okay.
It gives us a common language, a framework for understanding and analyzing these complex flows.
It's like having a decoder ring.
Yeah, for the global economy.
As the world becomes increasingly interconnected,
Which it definitely is.
understanding international finance is more important than ever.
I think that's a key takeaway.
Yeah, so as we wrap up our deep dive into BPM-6 and all these concepts, what are some of the key takeaways?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to remember that international finance, it's not just about abstract numbers.
Yeah.
It's about real people, real businesses, and real impacts on our lives.
Connecting the dots between what's happening in the world
Yes,
and our own personal experiences.
exactly.
BPM-6 is a valuable tool for understanding these concepts.
It helps us navigate this complex landscape.
It can be daunting at first,
Absolutely.
like learning any new language, but with a little bit of effort,
And guidance.
it becomes more accessible.
Yeah, you start to see the patterns and the logic behind it all.
And finally, I think it's important to remember that the world of international finance is constantly evolving.
Oh, yeah.
New technologies,
Yeah.
global events, policy changes,
All of these things.
they can all impact how capital flows.
How countries interact financially.
So it's important to stay informed, to keep learning.
And to be adaptable.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us today on this deep dive into the world of international finance and BPM-6.
It's been a pleasure.
Hopefully you've gained some valuable insights
Mm.
and are inspired to keep learning.
Knowledge is power.
Remember, knowledge is power.
Absolutely.